Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. There's more pressure on company boards now than ever before, and with a focus on ESG issues, the pressure is only going to increase. A new report from the Governance Institute of Australia provides an insight into what the board of the future will look like, the challenges they'll face, what issues that they'll be dealing with, and what skills and attributes board members will need to bring with them to be successful. Pauline is the chair of the Governance Institute of Australia. Pauline, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you.
Quite a comprehensive survey, 550 non-executive directors, CEOs, company secretaries and the like. More than 2/3 of the respondents were on a board and 40% said they were on more than one. ESG issues are obviously going to be a key theme, with I think it was 89% saying boards will need to align their purpose with community values. How much has that changed, that focus on ESG changed in recent years?
It's been a significant change. It's been emerging, I might say, as directors and chairs actually understand what ESG means. There's been so much confusion and so much, very much ESG. It might limit what I can do as a company. It's aligned to values rather than values. So as chairs have understood that if they don't manage non-financial risk, if they don't understand impact on their reputation, if they don't understand their impact on issues like cybersecurity, then the share value, will not be sustainable. Now, I must confess, I think one of the reasons why ESG, particularly the S, conduct risk, is so much at the forefront is with the various Royal Commissions, the Hayne Royal Commission in particular, into the financial services industry, really brought it to a fore. But shareholder advocates have been pushing for boards to understand non-financial risk for quite some time. And to be honest, this is just the start, because when you look at financial reporting today and what is made public in terms of company reports, there's very little in terms of measures and reporting on non-financial risk. And there's been a lot of work done and being done to make sure that that is treated just as importantly as financial risk in the reports that go to shareholders and other stakeholders.
Okay, so 9 out of 10 respondents agreed that accountability and responsibility will play a greater role for a board member. That role of a board member certainly has changed over the last decade, but it really accelerated since the Banking Royal Commission and the Laker report into Commonwealth Bank, I think.
Yes.
It just seems to be such a focus now.
Yes, and one of the reasons is that the regulatory oversight of boards is much heavier. Mm-hmm. The fines are more real. The criminal liability, and it really started off with occupational health and safety, board members have been jailed. So more and more scattered throughout industries in pieces of regulation are personal liability provisions on directors. And the latest is around respect at work, where if there is sexual harassment, then current drafting would put a personal liability on board members in terms of that. So when there is a threat of going to jail, it does tend to focus the mind a bit.
No doubt.
But that's not just one of the reasons. The big one is the external threats to any organisation today are much bigger and much more complicated than they were before. So previously you could fly into a board meeting, I call these seagull boards, look at the reports, have a nice lunch and fly out again. Now, the time it takes to really analyse, what is the threat to my organisation in terms of climate risk? Not only directly if I'm in oil and gas, but we know that climate change and climate risk will substantially change economies in Australia and the world. So how are we going to adapt to that? What are the risks? And more importantly, what are the opportunities? Cybersecurity, ransomware, incredibly complex, incredibly dangerous, and can have a devastating effect on any organisation. And directors are responsible for this. And then third, but not finally, and the S really in the ESG is the whole area of strategic human capital management. We know, we talked about in the media about mass resignations. We know that if a company makes 3,000 people redundant, it's going to be all over the press and it's going to impact on their share value. So managing human capital, making sure they are trained and you can adapt to the different needs of the organization is another complex area that boards have to think about and oversight. And I might just add in their conduct culture. So for the first time, I think the last few years, and it came out of the Commonwealth Bank review, came out of the Hayne Royal Commission, a clear obligation on boards to oversight culture.
Yep.
Culture is how we do things around here. Conduct culture is how we make those ethical decisions and those balances when we're making business decisions. And that's why that accountability is there when you are tasked with the oversight and responsibility of people's behaviour in your organisation. The information you need at board level is very different.
It begs the question, why become a board member? Because I think a few years ago, kind of the idea of sitting on a top 200 board or even a top 20 board was kind of glamorous. I'm not so sure now.
It's hard work. And that's the other big change. You have a lot of meetings, what I call not board meetings, but meeting of the boards, meeting with management in between meetings. So it is a very different role. And you've got to be passionate about leadership. But more importantly, which I think is another big change, is you've got to be passionate about the business. I think 20 years ago, you could go on a board, get paid well, but you didn't actually need to know about the business because you were there often as a name or, you were there for a different reason. But now you're tasked with an oversight and strategic function, which means you need to know the external environment, but you also need to know the business and the internal environment. And that's where having that diversity on boards is very important. So when people are looking at going on a board, they are interviewing the organisation just as much as they are interviewing you. I mean, being on a board can be very satisfying because now you can be a person of influence, but you want the right team with you. You want the diversity of thought and experience around the table because you can't be strong in every aspect. And that is what's important. So I think we're going to see automatically people on less boards. We're going to see higher director fees. And the concept of a professional director is going to become a lot more refined.
Yeah. Stay with me, Pauline. We'll be back in a moment. I'm speaking to Pauline Vamos, Chair of the Governance Institute of Australia. So you mentioned earlier on things like cybersecurity playing a much bigger role, strategic human capital. Are the skills that a board member needs in the next 10 years different to the ones in the previous 10 years? And then sort of part B of that question, does that mean we're likely to see a whole different cohort of people joining boards of ASX listed companies, or at least should we see a whole new cohort of people joining boards of listed companies?
As the report said, one of the most significant skills a director will need is strategic skills. Strategic. Now, strategic skills are not just the process of strategy. Strategic skills are really the ability to understand where the opportunities are and where the risks are, both internally and externally, in order to ensure that the business is sustainable. So that is interrogation skills, that is analytical skills, but it's also deep thinking and high-level skills. So, and this is the hard one to teach. So I think we're going to see a change in directors as they become more educated. Many boards, and it's not just about doing a course, it's about doing the learning, but also the type of experience. So we will start to see board members with more softer skills because of the human capital side. We will start to see board members with deep understanding of research. The regulatory side will still be there, but I think we will see in some cases, larger boards and certainly more diverse, because one director cannot have all the skills you need.
Okay, talking about diversity, and gender's the obvious one. I think we're at about a third of board directors are now women. That's a lot better than 10 years ago,
Yeah.
though given pretty much population split 50-50, we're obviously not there yet.
Yeah.
But then also ethnicity and all sorts of diverse, age and religion and those sorts of things. How do we get boards more diverse? And let's start with women.
There's a number of ways you can do this. First of all, the analysis of the skills and experience you need on the board, I think, is always underdone. So taking that process very, very seriously. Once you've identified the gaps, then you have to instigate a process where it's not tapping somebody on the shoulder, but actually opening up the process publicly. Mm-hmm. And into various sectors, and into the digital sector, into the health sector, because people with certain skills can bring a richness to the board that you don't have. Quotas are another way, which I think will gain traction because shareholders are now getting very impatient. But it's also about removing some of the bias in the interview process. So it's about putting all those levers in place. You need to be careful. Just because somebody has a certain ethnicity, that's not enough. They must have the skills or the emerging skills, but it's about broadening the skills and the lenses on the board. And once you start doing that, then you'll automatically start to get diversity.
Yeah. I suppose Telstra has a very young board director. I suppose I'm trying to say experience. Experience must matter to some extent. And whilst I appreciate particularly a telco needing digital skills, and say generally a 30-something-year-old is probably going to have a better skill set than me, let alone a 70-something-year-old, perhaps. In my mind, I wrestle with the concept of skill versus experience.
It's a balancing act, isn't it? So again, even at 30, you could have been working for well over 10 years, so you're bringing a certain level of experience. I think the challenge is more the skills around governance. I'm on a number of boards and have been on a number of boards, and you can have highly skilled people on the board, including younger skilled people. But it doesn't mean they're any good at being a board member. Yeah. And this is where the training about being a good board member, working in a team, because you are in the team. And this is where chairs come in. I chair 3 boards because a lot of my experience is bringing stakeholders and people together so that they can all contribute. So that's the more difficult one, ensuring people stay at the appropriate level and exercise their duties, which can be taught, and it can be coached.
Then the obvious question is, how many boards is too many?
If you've got a company in deep, deep trouble, one board is enough.
One board might be too many if it's in deep enough trouble.
Exactly. You might have to be in there every day sorting out a mess. And the report said that 54% think 3 to 4 board positions should be a limit. Certainly, if you're in the boards in the top 200, that is more than enough. You've got to leave bandwidth between meetings, but also, which is often not part of the discussion, committees. So there's the audit and risk committees, there's the governance committees, there's the rem and noms committees. And committees can take a lot of work. 34% thought that 2 to 3 should be the limit. And again, big boards, lots of committees, complex structures, probably right. And then 9% thought 5 or more. So you might have a couple of small not-for-profits, which are fairly easy, or small commercial, which are fairly easy. And it all depends on the size, the scale, the complexity, but also what stage the business is at. Yep. If you're meeting a lot, if you've got a strategy that you know can get you there for the next 3 years, then your job is to oversight. But if you're in a dynamic environment where the environment is changing, where because of technological disruption, your competition is changing, they're popping out of the woodwork, then you are going to have to talk strategy every month and work with management, which is one of the big changes as well. So, from the Governance Institute's viewpoint, what we say to professionals is you've got to really think about your time ability. And I have this discussion with a lot of my board members. Their board positions might not be in conflict, but it's time. There's a conflict of time.
Yeah.
And that can be very difficult.
Pauline, I think you have just destroyed any aspiration I ever had to sit on a board of anything.
Look, I think it is a noble cause.
Yep.
If you're passionate about the business, you are protecting shareholders. You are protecting customers.
I mean, we haven't discussed that. It's really, really important that there are directors, because it's actually my money in my super fund that's going into some of these big companies, and the director's looking after that. Really, really critical.
It is really important. So, as a super fund, as a trustee, you are holding those companies to account.
Yeah.
You are interrogating them. You're interrogating all aspects of how they're managing non-financial risks. So it is a noble profession, but it's not, it must be purposeful in my view. It is a deliberate vocation. It's a deliberate career. It shouldn't be accidental. And maybe that's a bit controversial, but you've got to approach it like you do any career. It's an important one, and the consequences of not doing a job properly can be devastating.
Pauline, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Pleasure. Thank you.
That was Pauline Vamos, Chair of the Governance Institute of Australia. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join me every morning for the full Fear and Greed podcast with all the business news you need to know. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.